America and our Q&A town hall with our endorsed candidate this evening. My name is Melissa, and I am the endorsements manager for both Roadmap for Progress and Building Bridges for America. I will do a quick overview of Building Bridges, and then we will get to our endorsed candidate for why she is running for office, and then go straight into our Q&A with her. Building Bridges for America was formed in 2020 during the Mayor Pete for president's run for president, sorry. And we were all grassroots organizers with his organization affiliated around the United States. And our mission is to be guided by the principles of servant leadership and to empower a network of other relational grassroots organizers and have them basically support campaigns and causes based in progressive values. Our values for Building Bridges for America are based on the Mayor Pete's rules of the road, and they are respect, belonging, truth, teamwork, boldness, responsibility, substance, discipline, excellence, and joy. And we have four major lenses that we try to abide by in everything that we do, which are belonging, bridging the rural and urban divide, racial equity, and democratic reform. We have weekly and actually all throughout the week, we have organizing classes that are really trying to connect with other people. And they have topics such as unlocking your political power and things that are really important right now, conversations that break through, popping the disinformation bubble, and basically how to have those hard conversations with people that may not agree with you. And everybody's favorite, because I don't know about you, but it's been a while for me since I've had civics from high school, but we have a Civics 101 basically to give you a brush up on those types of things. And you can go to our website, which is buildingbridgesforamerica.com, and sign up to join us for any of those weekly classes. We also have a list of I think we have 30 endorsed candidates currently active right now, and either running in primaries or ready for the general election in November. And we do things like these town halls with them on Sunday nights. And we also host text and phone banks, and we write postcards. You are welcome to join us any Sunday and meet any of the candidates and help us write postcards to reach voters for them. The next upcoming, we have a break next week. And then the following Sunday on August 28th, we will be talking to Adam Hattersley, who is the CFO, who is running for the CFO of Florida, which is a really interesting name for basically the treasurer of Florida. And tonight's special guest is Destiny Scott Wells, who is currently a candidate for the Indiana Secretary of State. You can follow her on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And she also has a website, which we will share during the conversation in the chat. You can also follow us on social media at Building Bridges for America. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to turn it over to Destiny to give us her spiel on why she's running for office and why she wants to be the next Secretary of State of Indiana.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm just letting you know, and I'm wearing one of my shirts tonight that says I dissent, so row the vote. And I'm literally blocks away from my house. So I'm gonna go back off camera so I can safely get back home. I am like any candidate, there's never really a night off. And so I was just at an event with over 200 concerned Hoosiers because in the state of Indiana, we just passed a bill to outlaw abortion. There are very limited exceptions, and this is definitely having an impact on the races here in Indiana, the conversation nationwide. We recently saw what happened in Kansas. And so we are trying our best to make sure that we are making informed decisions on our campaign and how we deal with this. It'll be September 15th that abortion will be outlawed in Indiana, and that will obviously impact our race and how we campaign through November 8th. I am running for Secretary of State. Secretary of State's races are not the normal sleepy races that they once were, even though they are a bit technocratic. They, for the most part across the nation and definitely in Indiana, are the chief election officers for their state. And so with democracy on the ballot this year in 2022, on the heels of 2020, the insurrection on January 6th, and the ongoing conversation that we see as to the integrity of elections, and the threat of election subversion in the future, it is so vital that good people, moral people, run for Secretary of State. And so here in Indiana, the incumbent was not nominated by the Republican Party. Instead, the Republican Party, since I was with Building Bridges last, nominated an election denier to run for Secretary of State. Indiana, people call it a ruby red state. And our campaign is running on the slogan that Indiana is not a red state. It is a purple state with a voter turnout problem. In Indiana, we are 46th in the nation registered voter turnout. In 2020, when probably everyone on this call was making sure that they voted, 1.6 million registered Hoosiers stayed home. So what does that mean? That means that we have so much room to work with, but we have to be able to activate those folks to the polls. And so where we are in this election as we speak today is that there have been multiple polls conducted, and I am in a statistical tie with my opponent. That is quite the achievement for this time of year, running against a Republican in the state of Indiana. And there is only more room for improvement because he's not a great candidate. And we are high contrast. A little bit about me. I'm an attorney. I've formerly been a deputy attorney general in the state of Indiana. And most importantly to me is that I, aside from being a mother and a wife, professionally is the most important, is that I have almost 20 years of military experience as an intelligence officer. I'm in the Army Reserve right now. I teach other field grade officers. And so everything I do is an extension of uniform in running for this race. To me, this race is the most important race across all states because it is a matter of national security. And what we are doing is we are taking head on the threats to our national security. We are looking at injustice in the face, and it is our moral obligation to win. And so that is what we are doing on this race.
Thank you, Destiny. And also thank you for your service. It is greatly, greatly appreciated, as well as your husband's. How do you, I know you said that that there were many inactive voters in Indiana. What is your plan to activate those voters and get them out to the polls this November?
Right, because it is much easier to say we're doing it than it really is in theory. And sorry, you're going to hear me transitioning from my car to my house. And so what we have to do is make sure that we are thinking about all of the ways that we're doing things outside of a normal candidate's purview. And when I say that, what do I mean? I mean that we are doing voter engagement in the traditional efforts that we would see with the party, the organized party. And so, if you lose for a long time, let's just say it, if you lose for a long time, it is, you're having to rebuild. And that's where we are in Indiana. The party's having to rebuild. And we have not won a statewide since 2012. That was superintendent. And then also we had the Senate race with Joe Donnelly. So it's been a while. And we're having to reach out to our county parties and organize with them. We're having to reach out to our caucuses, things like our college Democrats, our Latino caucus, our Black caucus, and making sure that we're doing those efforts within neighborhoods and not necessarily leaning on what we would expect a party to do for us. But we're still working hand in hand. I'm also running with two wonderful women. So for the first time, the Democratic Party is running
3 women, and it's down ballot statewide. So me, and then Jessica McClellan for treasurer, and Zanae Brooks for auditor. And so we're taking these issues that we're seeing, like SB1, which is the anti-abortion bill. We're taking issues like permitless carry. We had a mass shooting in Indiana in the late month of June that really primarily impacted the Latino community. And so what we see, like in Kansas, is a much better voter turnout when it comes to an issue, right? Voters feel issues. And so we're activating voters around those issues, and then also doing the field work, like I said, with the parties, and then also education. I have a great team, and we're doing a lot of digital outreach and making sure that voters now understand just how bad we are in Indiana as to showing up, and then also educating them as to why is this happening in your daily life? Why are you seeing this government overreach into your doctor's office? Well, primarily that's because of gerrymandering, decades of gerrymandering. And so voters are now understanding that the legislature, state legislatures, carry so much weight in their daily lives, right? We're just having a conversation that a lot of people, they never like to talk politics, but politics is in your life, from the pothole that you have to drive around every day to your now doctor's appointments and the most private matters of your life. And so you may not do politics, but politics is doing you every day. And people are starting to discover that. So it's a conglomerate. It's a lot of things we're trying to do. But I think I hit the main 3 things that we are trying to maximize opportunity on this year.
Thank you. And those are very important as well. A big push for the Democratic Party nationwide has been to reach and re-engage with rural voters. And I know that your parents are farmers. Are your parents very political? And what insight does growing up in rural Indiana give you all trying to reach out to these rural voters?
Oh, right. That's such a good question. I actually brought my parents with me to convention, and I refer to my dad in public, not at home. I don't call him this, but in public, I call him Farmer Ed. And so Farmer Ed is, and my husband's a farm kid too. So we both come from farming families. My husband actually comes from a much more rural community than I do. Hi, I'm in my house. And, I workshop on my parents. I workshop on my father, and that my father's pretty conservative. Not so much socially, but fiscally, he's really conservative. And then also, he watches maybe news channels I wouldn't watch. And so, it's a bit of an information game when I talk to my dad. And then my mother is a lifelong Republican, but not socially conservative whatsoever. And so I see her reacting to issues like permitless carry. I see her reacting to issues like SB1, and her saying things to me like, I just want things to go back to the way they were. And so that's what I grew up in. And I come from a very conservative town, where when I tell people in Indiana that I'm from Martinsville, they are very surprised. And I say, well, that's a lifetime of training and talking across the aisle. But you know what? I think a lot of people, look, I started out, I voted for, I'll say it on the record. And I say it, it's fine. I voted for Bush, in 2004. It was my first presidential election, because that's what I knew. That's what I grew up in. And so I think when we look at our rural communities, I have that, I can relate, and that you know what you grew up in. And so I think that gives us a really good opportunity in how we message. And I'm having to message in that way because I have a lot of Republicans who are supporting me. And they're supporting me because, just for a little background, in Indiana, there was a far right movement to pack convention and the delegate seats. And this is a delegate race for the nomination, a party nomination. And so their party kind of cannibalized, and they they voted in the far right candidate as, and we were discussing earlier, a referendum on the governor. And a large part of the governor of how they perceived it, an overreach in public health during COVID. And we're seeing that in a lot of states, like we're talking about Ohio. And so immediately I had Republicans reaching out to me that they wanted to support me. And I think some Republicans are just realizing it has gone too far. It has gone too far. And even nationally, right? We saw that this past week. But to your question, Indiana still very much largely supports the former President Trump, unfortunately. More people strongly support former President Trump than they strongly support President Biden. And so we have to be cognizant of that when we are campaigning, because you can't do anything until you win. We can, and I think as Democrats, we often let perfect be the enemy of good. And so we have to strategize in how we pursue this race. But with that being said, I appreciate you highlighting that that's my background, because I think that's what makes me a strong candidate. I may live downtown in the city and be an attorney, but I'm the first generation college grad. I'm the only attorney at the table, and I go back home for the holidays. And so I don't know if it was a bit of a long answer, so I don't know if I hit the main points, but I think I did, say some key highlights there.
You did, and I think those are very important, because I'm exactly like you, from a very conservative town and family, and the dinner table discussions are sometimes very interesting.
Yeah.
Animated at times, but not as animated as I thought they would be. So that's good. Maybe they're coming around.
No food ends up on the walls or on
exactly, no food
in anybody's hair.
Exactly.
We get through it. And then
Right.
my family has our holidays are dry. Like there's no drinking at our holidays. So you really
Ours
have
too.
to
Yeah,
show up.
I have to be armed with facts. And my father at one point said, "Wow, you make a lot of sense for a liberal Democrat." I was like, maybe.
You know what, a good anecdote from, if I can share this, is that when I brought my dad to Democratic convention, that's like over 1,000 Democrats there, right? I think I saw some people on this call there. And that was Saturday, and Sunday was Father's Day. And I went home for Father's Day to the farm. And I said, "Dad, I'm sorry to get you a gift. I've been busy." And he said, "That's okay. Yesterday was a gift in itself." And I said, "Well, why do you say that?" And he said, "Well, I realized while I was there that there were just 1,000 other really nice people, and that we had a lot of the same goals, different views and how we're supposed to get there. And that, maybe I need to stop watching so much news and start and make my own decisions, be a little objective." And so that was great.
Yeah, it's good to see this softening and not the rigidity that maybe I saw after 2016. Maybe.
Yeah.
So Wes has a question. Both senators from Indiana opposed the PACT Act to help veterans. I am not a veteran, but I was horrified. How are veterans groups in Indiana responding to this vote?
Right. And I was just with Senate candidate Tom McDermott tonight. And so, I don't know if you've seen that, he's obviously messaging very hard against that, because if you hear Todd Young speak, who is a senator and a Marine, was in 4 years in the Marines early as a young adult, he'll say, "I always supported it and it was the Democrats' fault." And so how are veterans groups reacting? Well, you're going to have misinformation out of Senator Young regardless. And, I can't say that I saw any public statements out of veterans groups, but I was with one a couple weeks ago. And I think, a lot of veterans who pay attention realize that their interests are not being put forward by those who say they have their interests in mind. But veterans are a melting pot. I don't think I can answer a question on behalf of veterans without giving you maybe 3 different answers of where I see different types of veterans, and how they think. You know what I'm saying? But I'll speak how I personally felt as a veteran. I just, I get sick of one party saying they have a monopoly on patriotism, saying they have veterans' backs. You know how weird it is for me to run I'm a lieutenant colonel right now. I'm in the reserve. So all these opinions are my own, and not that of the Department of Defense. Just throw that out there. But it feels very unsettling when I walk into groups and people automatically just don't like me because I'm a Democrat, but at the same time try to act like they just love veterans. It makes me really upset personally.
Yeah. I had a friend running here, and she said that when she was knocking doors, she was a veteran of the Air Force. And that as soon as Republicans found out she was a veteran, they were more likely to keep the door open slightly than slam it in her face after finding out she's also a Democrat. So there was a level of respect there that made it a little bit harder for them to be negative and rude.
I'll take my literature and I'll hand it and I'll go, hi, I'm an Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel who's running for Indiana Secretary of State. And it only one time has it not worked. And that one time the woman took the lit and she tore it in half and then tore it again in front of children and everything at a parade. And she said, I know, I'm just so mean or something. And I just looked at her, and she looked like a jerk, but other than that, yes, if I intro that I'm a veteran, somehow it kind of neutralizes a little bit, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote for me.
True. At least you don't get a door slammed in your face, though. I guess there's the positive.
Right.
So but as far as voting rights, does Indiana still have a need an excuse absentee voting policy?
Right. So Indiana is limited on its absentee voting. I'll talk about mail-in absentee. Right now we have 11 exceptions. And then also we should note that Indiana, nothing same day, right? So voter registration deadline's 28 days. So you have to make sure that it takes a while to get your absentee ballot in, all these things. And so I say that keeping that in mind, that currently there are 11 exceptions for mail-in absentee. My opponent wants to limit it to 4. And those 4 exceptions are, disabled, the sick or infirm, military, and won't be in town on election day. That's really hard to attest that you won't be available on election day. It's this is a lot of the voter suppression is the intent is to have a chilling effect, right? You're not sure, you're scared that you might violate something. And so you just don't vote at all. So he wants to limit it to 4. That's very wild because right now Indiana has a 65 and older exception to mail-in absentee. Makes no sense for a Republican to ever get rid of that, right? And so what his ultimate goal is, he wants everybody to vote in person. And so in Indiana, we do have a bit liberal policy on early voting. We have 28 days. We're 28 days. And so Republicans like to say it's not voting, it's not election day in Indiana, it's election month. And he wants to limit those 28 days. He wants to cut it in half to 14. So as far as the absentee voting, same day voter registration, Indiana is, like I said, we're already 46th in the nation in registered voter turnout. The more that we disallow options for voting, the worse we're going to get. And then obviously we have in Indiana, like most states that are overwhelmingly may look red and have all those populations in just, a handful of blue counties. The state house, our supermajority Republican legislature, aims a lot of those voter suppressive measures at the blue counties. Of
course they do. So when you were talking about one of the reasons that you can do absentee is if you have a disability. How do you think the existing voting laws in Indiana adversely affect the disability community when voting?
So it depends on what county you're in, how easy it is to vote if you are disabled. And so I'll give an example. Because right now there's a lawsuit in Indiana. Immediately was a lawsuit on behalf of those who are blind about Indiana's voting situation. So Indiana is one of, I believe, 6 states that still uses DREs, so the direct recording election machines. And so you go in and you just push a button, right? And there's no paper trail or anything. And a majority of our counties use those. So our infrastructure in Indiana, our election machine infrastructure is very antiquated. It goes against CISA. It goes against Department of Homeland Security. Like they say, those electronic machines have a lot of issues. It may not be that it's just malfeasance. It may be that, you go in and you push a button, you come out and you say, I didn't, hey, that wasn't what I voted. It could be a calibration issue. So what does that have to do with those who may have a disability? Well, we have put these paper audit trails on them. They're called VVPAT machines, and it's like a receipt roll. And you can see as you're voting what you voted for. So immediately it gets a lawsuit, and those things are a problem themselves. And we can discuss that if anybody wants to. But immediately there was a lawsuit on behalf of those who are vision impaired or blind because they can't see that recording. And in that, the judge, it's in the Southern District, the federal court judge, the chief judge, she said that she was gravely concerned about Indiana's ability to rectify the situation. And so they're like doing conference calls with the court to try to show that they are accommodating those with a disability. That's just one example, of how we don't accommodate those who may have a disability in our voting procedures.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. This is talking about overseas voting. Many national groups have realized the importance of reaching Americans either serving overseas with the military, working overseas with jobs, or students attending school overseas during an election cycle. What would you do to reach these voters and make sure they understand the importance of their vote, even when not living within the boundaries of the United States?
Well, we're not going to know you're overseas until you register that you notify the state you are, right? So it's a little hard to say we're going to we need to do voter outreach in Indiana. To then also say that we'll be doing voter outreach across the world to those who may not be within the state. But I will speak firsthand to, because I have voted from Afghanistan. And I voted as a member of the military. I think one of the big beefs that people have, and I just had a retired general discuss this with me the other day, is that Indiana loves to announce their results first. It's like a prize that they want for some reason. They always strive to announce first in the country, which actually I would say is a morale killer for Hoosiers, right? Because it's like, we don't even have a chance if we're not voting conservative, right? Because they just announce right away, like the margins are so large, and which it's just that they're in a rush. And so what happens is that those people who do vote absentee because they're not in the country, their votes really aren't even counted, right? Once the races are announced, the winner. And so I have heard multiple complaints from my military friends, and I would assume those overseas just in general feel the same way, that you go to all this trouble to vote absentee, and then your vote's not even really counted, but for after the fact. So that would be something that I would want to definitely look to, as far as the biggest service that I could do to those who are located outside of the country and voting absentee by mail.
Thank you for that. We're going to jump to the abortion ban and how that affects the economy. As Secretary of State, you will oversee new businesses in Indiana. What economic impact do you think Indiana will face because of its severe abortion ban?
Okay. Well, I want to taper that back a little though, because I don't oversee a lot of what goes on with small businesses. It's the business services division, in that the small business does its licensing through the state, through the Secretary of State's office, and officially files as a business entity. And then so I'm not aware of, and I would love to start, some metrics as far as the businesses that do license, and how viable they are, right? Are they still around 6 months later? Are they still around a year later? Oh, they're not around. Why? And then looking to different groups within communities. I had a great workshop with a group who just looks at the Black business enterprise, and you could see the gaps in service, not just from the Secretary of State's office, but a lot of government agencies are involved with business formation through to everyday business happenings. But as far as SB1, obviously women are going to wash out of the workforce. We just know this as women. During COVID, I was one of the women who washed out of the workforce. It did not make sense to me, but I could swing it, right? I had the privilege to be able to do that because my husband was working full time. But it was not making sense to me for the amount of money I was making, which was not a lot because I was in government, municipal government, to be taking my son to daycare and sitting in the parking lot and watching him get his temperature taken, and him only being a year old. A lot of parents made those decisions. And that was the impact from being a mom, from having a child, right? So of course, women are going to wash out of the workforce when they're having an unwanted family planning. And, that would be maybe one of those metrics to look at, how many women-owned businesses are there? And I don't know if we can look back historically and see, it would require some work. But I think that, when you are able to show data of the impacts of bad legislation, that is an area to look at, when it comes to small businesses. I would foresee it will not be good.
I know in Ohio, I'm in Cincinnati, there are some pretty large national corporations headquartered here, and I have friends working there, and they've already said that these two companies and specifically are having problems recruiting new talent to come to the state because of the heartbeat and abortion situation in Ohio. And so I have a feeling that might be a trickle-down effect for a lot of states going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Indiana is the crossroads of America, and our Pete is Secretary of Transportation, overseeing a historical investment in infrastructure. One critical challenge is converting to electric vehicles. Your office will work closely with auto dealerships. What opportunities and challenges do you see economically for auto dealers with the conversion to electric vehicles?
That's a pretty nuanced question. So, we again do auto dealership licensing. Beyond that, we don't oversee how the dealerships are doing business. Incentive programs would not come directly from the Secretary of State's office. We do not legislate there may be some nuance or maybe some slight rulemaking or something within the Secretary of State's office, but any of that would come from the legislature and be between the legislature and the governor. Obviously, I very much appreciate the Department of Transportation policy and watching Secretary Pete lead that. But that, as Secretary of State, the most we can do is help dealerships. Dealerships seem to have, I know they do, they have this relationship with manufacturers, right? And so any of those, when there's conflict, before it's a court case, that is dealt with the Secretary of State's office, so we can just live our values and make sure that those dealerships are duly represented. And right now, I don't think they feel that way. So that's room for improvement there.
This is probably outside of the boundaries of the office you're running for, more your personal. What type of infrastructure improvements would you like to see done in the state of Indiana?
Well, look, I've litigated potholes. I live in Marion County, and Marion County is the county with the capital. Local role is completely usurped by the state legislature. And so, having worked for the county, I've seen that, counties have to do what they can with limited resources. So any federal money that comes in is great for us. I've been on the road with the Democratic Party, and we've talked about all of the federal money that's come in that the state government loves to take ownership of. So, in Indiana, I think local governments can I would like to see improvements with their roads, or how much resources are put toward departments of public works, because unfortunately the pothole always wins. I tell people, don't sue the pothole. The pothole always wins. And I think just locally, your day-to-day travel, that's where people can see the most impact, right? Is in municipal infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to voting location and purges of the voter roll. I know that they have been in Ohio, and I think Indiana as well, in the past maybe 2 to 4 years. They've seen closing of many of the polling locations on where people can vote, as well as some aggressive voting purges of voters on the rolls. Have you seen much of that? And what kind of impact do you think that has on Black and Brown communities in Indiana?
Right. No, I mean, Indiana has been sued a couple times just within the last 4 years for purging people off the voter rolls without notification to the voter. Something that we were looking into is can there be a system where if you are purged from the voter roll, because you do have to do upkeep on the voter roll, right? There is a healthy amount of percentage that should be taken off the voter roll from time to time, because people do move and don't notify, or you find out from the Department of Health that people have passed, et cetera. And so, is there something where they're notified so that you do catch those administrative errors? Because, there will be accidents. In Indiana, though, the court said this is not an accident. And so, we could do something better. We could join ERIC, which is a program where all the states, they have an agreement where they inform other states, about updates to personnel on the information on the voter rolls. We're not a part of that. It's seen as something too progressive, and Republican states they have a hard time joining ERIC. So we could join ERIC. But, as far as the disparate impact on marginalized but high impact communities, it would be probably, the information piece, right? And then also people tend to move a lot. Who's the transient population? It's people who are renting. And so those voters, because of how they move and their addresses, see higher impacts than maybe somebody who owns a home and doesn't move, right? So those are also things to keep into consideration.
Absolutely. So what are specific voting changes that you would like to see once you win in November? And what additional access would you be willing to fight for Hoosiers going forward?
Right. So with the Secretary of State's office, a lot of it's advocacy, right? Because the legislature at the end of the day is the one who's passing the laws. The ones that for the most part here in Indiana have been quite oppressive. And so it's about what would you advocate for? I would advocate for why do we have one of the longest voter registration deadlines, right? A lot of people don't even start thinking about who they're going to vote for until a couple weeks before elections. And then they realize that the deadline passed because it's 28 days long. And so shortening the voter registration deadline, obviously, if the best scenario is like my sister-in-law who lives in Oregon and it's just all automatic voter registration. They make it very easy for you to vote. Also there's a problem with staffing polling sites. Of course, we're not making that any better when we're peddling conspiracy theories and making people feel stressed out to go work the polls. But we are one of 2 states that closes the polls at 6 p.m. That's very hard for working Hoosiers to close the polls at 6 p.m. Why are we doing that? We should look at something like that. Indiana also is it was the first state with strict voter ID. What is strict voter ID? That is government issued photo ID and also needs an expiration date in the state of Indiana. And so we are one of the states with the strictest voter ID. Why is it that you can take a college ID in from a state school, but you can't take your ID in from, a private school like Hanover or Butler? Maybe not Butler. No, maybe private school. Anyway, that's silly, right? So there are these, it's like the voter ID ship sailed. People are for voter ID, so, okay, let's expand how we're doing that. And that's a lot of how, as a Democratic Secretary of State, coming into a sea of Republicans, Republican governor, supermajority Republican legislature, Republican-led agencies, that you would have to start to make those incremental, sensical changes. And then also better relationships with the counties. In Indiana, we have 92 counties, and the majority of those counties are Republican-led because the majority of them, are not in an urban area. I have sat down with the State Clerks Association, and we had a great conversation. All of that organizational leadership from the military just came forward because they want people advocating for them, right? They don't want to be the scapegoat of these ideas of election integrity issues. They're the ones getting the phone calls every day. It's the ones that makes their life hard. And so those are other relationships to establish, to start to really look at voting, county by county, and making sure that it is the best setup for each community's county. Now, a lot of that decision-making lies with the county, right? In Indiana, we have vote centers. And so if you're a county and you want to have vote centers, that means there's an X amount of vote centers set up in your county and you can go to any of those. So if anybody's running for Secretary of State and they have some pie in the sky agenda, they're unrealistic. It is very nuanced, and you have to be very realistic about what you can and can't do. What you need to do is you need to be constantly advocating, constantly counter messaging against misinformation. I love what Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson is doing in the state of Michigan. She has entire programs devoted to disinformation. And it's a lot of the work that she does is education. And so I want to similarly do that for the state of Indiana. She also brings in partners throughout the state, like nonprofits. She has an advisory board, a pro-democracy program that is coupled with, it works with nonprofits. to get out the vote. And then also she has like a college advisory team that talks about the challenges to voting in college towns. Look, Indiana's got a brain drain. We've made it so hard. Why would we not want to engage our new college students who come here and get them civically involved in their local, in their community? That is the best way to start to invest in them to stay here. There's just tons of great things that we can do to improve voter access throughout the state of Indiana.
Great answer. Thank you very much. And I didn't realize that Jocelyn Benson had all of those programs in place. I know she's fantastic, but I didn't know that she was doing all that.
Yeah. It's hard to do voter outreach and not make it partisan. Right. And so then you get it's like, well, now you're kind of electioneering or, so doing it as a pro-democracy effort really just gets people on both sides of the aisle on board. And I actually am seeing that in my race personally, right? When I'm having Republican support because they don't like the far right candidate. And it's because we're running as the pro-democracy candidate who's on the ballot.
That's fantastic and a great way to address that too. Kaz said, tell me about coordinating with the other statewide candidates in Indiana. Do you feel that working together makes it easier for voters?
I was just with them. So I was just with Jessica McClellan. And can I just say that, so our ticket has so much experience, right? So the Republican ticket does have one incumbent on it as the auditor. But our auditor candidate works at Cummins, which is a great company, right? She's a professional CPA. She's been an auditor. She's a controller. Jess, who is running for treasurer, she's her county treasurer in Monroe County. She has a ledger to prove, just how great she is at being a treasurer. And so we have these three women who have all this experience. Even as an intel officer, my foundational training is in things like information security, all the things that we talk about with elections. And so we're running around with all of this experience and trying to get Hoosiers to take notice, because down ballot statewide races are hard, right? Mine's super popular because of what's going on right now. They're making theirs popular by saying, hey, in Indiana, we have a $6 billion surplus. You want women like us talking about making decisions how that money's allocated, and allocated in a more equitable way. And, they're threading it, like talking about our education rankings, all these great things. So I like running side by side with them. So to answer Kaz's question specifically, we talk about this idea of coordinated campaigns all the time. They're always like this wish list thing, like to run a coordinated campaign. And so we're trying to do that. And we're trying to do that, in working with State Party. But we're talking to each other regardless, right? We're doing an event together tomorrow night, and people are liking seeing 3 qualified women running to try to be in these positions that have so much influence, especially on the heels of SB1. And so, Kaz, we're talking all the time, and we'll probably do some mailers with all 3 of us on it and stuff. But it more than anything, I think we're really trying to lean in, contacting those counties directly. The party wants some regional coordinators, but it's a little late in the cycle to depend on those regional coordinators. So we don't want it to be November 8th late at night and be thinking coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And we are just trying to work together as best as we can and help each other.
Have you been coordinating with other Secretary of State candidates nationwide as well, and getting leaning advice from them? I know you mentioned Jocelyn Benson, but any others that are?
Well, so I'm just starting to network with them, because what the first step was working with Democratic Association of Secretaries of State. And so we have weekly calls with Daz. We're in Daz's messaging now. When national resources are needed, you have to prove that you're a viable statewide race. And, you know, Democrats have this tendency to only look at swing states, you know, and David Pepper, right, he rails against this all the time because he said, you know, the Republicans were looking at a 50-state strategy and they went towards the state houses and the Democrats were outmaneuvered. But regardless, you still, the resources are limited. They just are, and they're always going to be limited. Well, no, you know what? Somebody said that tonight. They said, that's just the way it is. And I said, I'm not saying, no, it's going to change. We should not accept that it's just the rule, but currently it's the environment. And so I have all their phone numbers and I am supposed to start calling them all to tell them, hey, I'm Destiny over in Indiana. I don't know if you know this, but I'm going to win. So we should get to know each other. But, you know, comparatively, like I love looking to people like Jocelyn and to watch and to see what they're doing. Right. And to see what works, what doesn't work. As Secretary of State, because Jocelyn has been through, you know, I mean, that was like,
yeah,
wild times.
So we would highly recommend our other candidate, Adrian.
Yeah, Adrian's
too. He's also military. He's a veteran as well. So
yeah, and he clinched.
He's lighting it up down in Arizona.
Yeah, he won his primary recently. Of course, I was watching that because he was on my radar much earlier because he was one of your candidates. Yeah. So that's great. He's got a heck of a race too. You know, it's crazy because his opponent and my opponent like are on a lot of the same lists. Like you'll see their names flashed together now on like MSNBC, or there was an article out in CNN this past week that got a lot of mileage that had the election denier Secretary of State's candidates. So Adrian and I are both running against gentlemen of the same ilk.
Yeah, and his race is interesting because I didn't realize until interviewing him that Arizona does not have a lieutenant governor. So if something happens to the governor,
he's
like
second
next in line.
Oh, I'm third. I would be third. Yeah,
you're like Ohio, but I was like, that's really interesting.
You know, honestly, I'll just say how it is. Like, you know, when resources are limited, when Adrian, his opponent won, I just thought, man, they're going to spend so much money on his race. And, you know, in Indiana, we try to tell people nationally, you should definitely invest in us. We're going to win. We're a cheap date here in Indiana. You do not have to spend a lot to play in Indiana. It's not Arizona.
I agree. Ohio is the same way. Chelsea Clark would make a great SOS over here. So if you haven't connected with her, she's good too.
Yeah, we sent a couple messages.
We want to respect your time because I know you have a quiet evening ahead. And yeah. And so our last question is always, so if you were stuck in an elevator with me and I was an undecided voter in Indiana, how would you persuade me to vote for you?
Well, I would ask if you support democracy. Of course, you're going to say yes. And then I would say that I'm the only pro-democracy candidate on the ballot this year. And, you know, I usually just really, the sky is falling in 2024. Look, the attorney in me is frightened. And when I talk to other attorneys, they're frightened too, right? 2024 I see as a constitutional crisis is coming. And especially with the independent state legislature theory being heard by the Supreme Court this fall. Now, I probably wouldn't say that in the elevator pitch, but I'm letting you know that this is my thought process. And so that we need to uphold elections, and that elections, I said it to you guys when I was on, I think 3 or 4 months ago, elections should be off the table. And I'm the only one that will keep elections off the table as far as any partisan agenda. And then I'd probably say something like, my opponent spent $44,000 on a vehicle with campaign cash. And do you really want somebody like that overseeing the administration of campaign finance? I don't think so.
No, you know. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, because we greatly, greatly appreciate you and your time. And we cannot wait to see you win on November 8th. And
well, thank you.
Thanks for everybody for attending. And I'm